Today I'm going to tell you the story of Samuel Carter, a lonely rancher who bought a desperate young woman and her baby at an auction. When Lily Morrison cried, "I can cook and sew, please just feed my baby," Samuel's act of compassion would change both their lives forever. But the ending exceeded all expectation. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening to this story from. The auction block decision. The Wyoming Territory sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty town square of Cedar Falls. As Samuel Carter adjusted his worn leather hat and surveyed the crowd gathered around the makeshift auction platform. The summer of 1884 had been particularly harsh, and the weekly auctions had become a grim necessity for families who could no longer afford to feed themselves or their children. Samuel, a weathered rancher of 38 with calloused hands and kind gray eyes, had come to town for supplies, not expecting to witness what would change his life forever. The auctioneer, a portly man named Hutchins with a voice like gravel, was calling out prices for various items and services. Samuel had seen these auctions before, desperate people selling family heirlooms, livestock, and sometimes even themselves into servitude to survive another winter. But today felt different. Today the desperation seemed thicker than the dust that coated everything in sight. "Next up," Hutchins bellowed, wiping sweat from his brow, "we have young Lily Morrison and her infant child. The girl's 18, strong as an ox, and can work harder than most men I've seen. She's offering cooking, cleaning, sewing, and any other domestic work in exchange for room and board." Samuel's attention snapped to her. A young woman stepped forward, clutching a small bundle. Even from his position near the back of the crowd, he could see she was striking. Auburn hair that the sunlight, despite being pulled back severely, emerald green eyes that held both fierce determination and barely contained terror, and a figure that her worn calico dress couldn't quite but it was the way she held herself, straight back despite her obvious desperation, that caught Samuel's attention. "I can cook and sew," he called out, her voice carrying a square with surprising strength. "I'll work from dawn to dusk, I promise. Please just feed my baby." Her voice cracked slightly words, and Samuel felt something twist in his chest. The crowd murmured, but the bidding was lackluster. Most of the ranchers and townspeople seemed hesitant about taking on both a woman and a child. Samuel watched as Lily's composure began to crack, her eyes darting desperate in the crowd. "Come now, folks. This girl's got fire in her. She'll work twice as hard as anyone else just to keep that baby fed. What am I bid?" $5, called out old Pete Garrison from the front, and Samuel's blood ran cold. He knew Garrison's reputation with young women who worked for him. The old man's wives had a tendency to disappear under mysterious circumstances. $5 from Mr. Garrison, Hutchins. Anyone else? Samuel found himself stepping forward before he'd made a conscious decision. $25, he called out, his deep voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. Heads turned toward him, and he could feel the weight of their stares. Lily's eyes found his across the crowded square, and for a moment time seemed suspended. There was something in her gaze, a mixture of hope and wariness, that made Samuel's resolve strengthen. $25 from Mr. Carter, Hutchins, clearly pleased with the sudden increase. Anyone care to top that? Garrison scowled his head, apparently unwilling to spend more on what he clearly saw as temporary help. The other bidders remained silent, either unable or unwilling to match Samuel's offer. $25 going once, going twice. Hutchins raised his gavel. "Sold to Samuel Carter." As the crowd began to disperse, Samuel made his way toward the platform. Up close, Lily was even more beautiful than he had initially thought, but it was the intelligence in her eyes and the protective way she held her child. The baby? A girl no more than 6 months old with wispy blonde hair and her mother's green eyes, slept peacefully despite the chaos around her. "Mr. Carter," Lee said, as steady despite the tears threatening to spill from her eyes, "I want you to know that I meant what I said. I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired. I can cook, clean, sew, tend a garden, help with livestock, whatever you need." "What's the baby's name?" asked gently, ignoring her desperate promises for the moment. Rose, surprised by the question. "Her name is Rose." "Pretty name for a pretty girl," Samuel said, offering a small smile. "And your full name?" "Lily Morrison, sir. I know what you're probably thinking, and I want you to know that Rose's father died in a mining accident before she was born. I haven't She stumbled over the words, clearly flustered. "I'm not thinking anything except that you and Rose need a safe place to live, Samuel. My ranch is about 10 miles north of here. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. Your own room, 3 meals a day, and I'll pay you a small wage on top of room and board." Lily stared at him in disbelief. You're offering to pay me? On top of what you just bid? A person should be paid for their work, said simply. The auction was just to get you away from Garrison and men like him. My housekeeper died last winter, and I've been managing on my own since. I could use the help, but more importantly, you and Rose need safety. For the first time since stepping onto the platform, Lily's composure cracked completely. Tears streamed down her face, struggled to find words. "I don't understand. Why would you be so kind to strangers?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I lost my wife and son to fever 3 years ago. I know what it's like to feel completely alone in this. Nobody should have to go through that, especially not with a child depending on them." Lily nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her. "Thank you. I promise you won't regret this." "I'm sure I won't," Samuel replied. "Now, let's get you and Rose out of this heat. My wagon's just over there, and we can be home before sunset." As they walked toward his wagon, Samuel couldn't help but notice how heads turned to watch them. Some faces showed curiosity, others disapproval, and a few showed outright hostility. He'd face questions and gossip, he knew, but looking at the relief on Lily's face as she settled Rose in the back of the wagon, he found he didn't care much about what the townspeople. The ride home would give them time to talk, to begin figuring out how this arrangement would work. Samuel had acted on instinct, but now the reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. He was bringing a beautiful young woman and her child to his isolated ranch, where they would be alone together most of the time. It was a recipe for gossip at best, scandal at worst. But as he clicked the reins and guided his horses out of town, Samuel knew he'd made the right. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they had to be better than leaving Lily and Rose to fend for themselves in a world that had already proven too harsh for them to survive alone. A new home and old. The 10-mile journey to Samuel's ranch passed in relative silence, broken only by the creaking of wagon wheels and Rose's occasional soft coos. Lily sat rigidly beside Samuel on the wagon seat, clutching her daughter and stealing glances at the man who had just changed their life. The Wyoming landscape stretched endlessly around, rolling hills covered in sagebrush, wild grass, with the distant Rocky Mountains creating a dramatic backdrop against the. "Tell me about your ranch." Needing to break the tension that seemed to thicken with each mile they traveled away from civilization. Samuel's weathered hands were steady on the reins as he considered her question. "It's not much to look at from the outside," he admitted. "Two-story farmhouse that I built myself about 10 years ago. Got a barn, chicken coop, and enough pasture land for about 200 head of cattle. I run mostly Hereford, good stock for this climate." "Do you have help? Other workers, I mean?" Trying to keep her voice casual, while her mind raced with the implications of being alone with this stranger. "I've got 2 ranch hands who come around during busy seasons, spring roundup, branding, that sort of thing, but most of the time it's just me." Samuel glanced at her sideways, seeming to understand her unspoken concerns. "The guest room is on the ground floor, right off the kitchen. It's got a good strong lock on the door, and I want you to use it. Your safety and Rose's safety come first. Always." Lily felt some of her tension ease at his words. "You mentioned you lost your family. I'm sorry for your loss." Samuel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My wife Mary was, well, she was a lot like you, actually. Strong, determined, beautiful. She could outwork most men when she set her mind to something." His voice softened. "Our boy David was only 2 when the fever. They died within days of each. That must have been terrible." Instinctively adjusting Rose in her arms. "It was. For a long time I thought about selling the ranch, maybe California or Oregon Territory. But this place, it's got their memory built into every board and nail. I couldn't leave it." They rode in comfortable silence for a while after that, both lost in their own thoughts. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when Samuel pointed ahead to a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley between 2 low hills. "There she is, with obvious home." Lily's breath caught in her. The ranch was far more impressive than Samuel's modest description had led her to believe. The 2-story house was well constructed and well maintained, with a wraparound porch and large windows that suggested a spacious interior. The barn was massive and freshly painted, and she could see a vegetable garden that, while currently overgrown, showed signs of having once been carefully tended. "Beautiful," she breathed, and meant it. Mary designed most of it, Samuel, pulling the wagon up to the front porch. She had big dreams for this, wanted to raise a whole passel of children here, fill every room with laughter. As they climbed down from the wagon, Lily couldn't help but notice how Samuel's eyes lingered on Rose, who was just beginning to wake from her travel-induced. There was something achingly tender, mixed with a pain so deep it made Lily's heart hurt for. "Let me show you around," Samuel said, shouldering Lily's small bag, the sum total of her worldly possessions. "We'll start with your room so you can get Rose settled." The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and windows that filled the space with warm afternoon light. Samuel led her to a room just off the kitchen, clean, spacious, and furnished with a sturdy bed, a dresser, and even a rocking chair positioned near the window. "This was going to be the nursery, but it'll work well for you and Rose. There's a crib in the attic if you want it touched. It's more than I ever hoped." Samuel nodded and cleared his kitchens through that door. "Help yourself to anything you need, any time. I usually eat pretty simple. Bacon, beans, biscuits, whatever I can throw together. But if you're as good a cook as you claimed at the auction, I won't complain about better meals." "I am a good cook," with the first real smile arriving. "My mother taught me before she died. I can make a decent meal out of almost anything." "I'll hold you to that," Samuel's returning her smile. "Now, let me show you the rest of the place. Then we'll get that crib set up." The tour revealed a house that was clearly built with love and attention to detail. The kitchen was spacious and well-equipped, with a large cast-iron stove and plenty of counter space. Upstairs were 3 more bedrooms, including Samuel's, which he pointed out only briefly before moving on. Throughout the house, Lily noticed small feminine touches, curtains, decorative items, flower patterns in the wallpaper, that spoke of the woman who had once made this place a home. "She had wonderful taste," Lee said as they made their way back downstairs. "She did," Samuel agreed. "I haven't changed much since she's been gone. Couldn't bring myself to do it." That evening, as Lily prepared their first meal together, a simple but flavorful stew made from supplies Samuel had in his pantry, she found herself studying her benefactor more closely. He was clearly a man who worked hard. His hands were scarred and calloused, his face weathered by years of sun and wind. But there was kindness in his gray eyes and gentleness in the way he spoke to Rose when the baby fussed during dinner. "This is delicious, Samuel," after his first spoonful of stew. "Best meal I've had in years." "It's just stew," Lily protested, but she was pleased by the compliment. "Maybe, but it tastes like someone cared about making it, Samuel. That makes all the difference." After dinner, as Lily cleaned up and Samuel tended to some paperwork at the kitchen table, a comfortable domestic rhythm began to establish itself. Rose gurgled happily in her new crib, which Samuel had retrieved from the attic and set up with surprising efficiency. "I want to be clear about something," Samuel said suddenly, looking up from his paper. "This arrangement, it's not what some people in town are going to think it is. You're here as my employee, nothing more. You don't owe me anything beyond honest work, and I won't expect anything from you that wasn't part of our agreement." Lily met his gaze steadily. "I understand, and I want you to know that I'm grateful. More grateful than you can imagine. You saved our lives today. Maybe I've been rattling around this big house alone, and it's been having life in these rooms again, hearing a baby's. Maybe we're helping each other." As Lily settled Rose for the night and prepared for her first sleep in a real bed in months, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she and her daughter had finally found not just safety, but a place where they could build a new life. Outside her window, the Wyoming wind whispered through and for the first time in a very long time, it sounded like a lullaby instead of a warning, growing closer through hardship. 3 weeks had passed since Lily and Rose arrived at the ranch. A comfortable routine had developed between the unlikely household members. Each morning, Lily rose before breakfast, while Samuel tended to the live. The aroma of fresh coffee and bacon would greet him when he returned, along with the sight of Lily moving gracefully around the kitchen, Rose babbling contentedly from her high chair that Samuel had constructed of scrap wood. "You spoil us," Samuel said, as Lily set a plate of fluffy biscuits and gravy before him. She had transformed his simple meals into something that reminded him of home-cooked food from his childhood. "It's my job." But there was warmth in her voice that suggested she enjoyed the work. She had filled out slightly since arriving, the constant worry about her next meal, replaced by the security of knowing she and Rose were safe and fed. Your job is to help around the house. What you do goes far beyond that." He gestured toward the main room, where Lily had slowly begun making small improvement. Wildflowers in mason jars, pillows she'd sewn from fabric scraps, small touches that made the house feel alive again. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Samuel frowned as he looked out the kitchen window to see 3 riders approaching at a fast pace. He recognized Tom Bradley, the foreman from the neighboring Double B ranch, along with 2 men he didn't know. "Lily, take Rose to your room and lock the door," said quiet, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle hanging above. "What's wrong?" Lily asked, but she was already scooping Rose from her chair. "Maybe nothing, but I don't recognize 2 of those, and they're riding hard." Samuel waited until he heard Lily's door close, stepping onto the porch, his rifle resting casually in the crook of his arm. "Morning, Tom," Samuel called out, as the riders pulled up in front of the house. "What brings you out this way so early?" Tom Bradley dismissed grim with, "Sorry to bother you, but we've got trouble. These gentlemen are deputy marshals and Marshal Peterson. They're looking for a woman and child." The taller of the 2 lawmen, a stern-faced man with a silver badge gleaming on his vest, stepped forward. "I'm Marshal Peterson. We're looking for a young woman named Lily Morrison, traveling with an infant. She's wanted for question in connection with the death of her employer back in Colorado Territory." Samuel kept his expression neutral, though his grip tightened on his rifle. "What kind of questioning?" "The man she worked for was found dead in his home, and she disappeared the same night, with money and jewelry missing," Deputy Williams explained. "We've been tracking her across 3 territories." "That's a serious accusation," Samuel said. "You have evidence she was involved?" "She was the only other person in the house when it happened, and she ran instead of reporting the death to local authorities. Makes her look mighty guilty." Before Samuel could respond, the sound of his front door opening made all heads turn. Lily stepped onto the porch, Rose in her arms, her chin held high despite the obvious fear in her green eyes. "I'm Lily Morrison," her voice steady, "and I didn't kill anyone." Peterson's hand moved to his gun, but Samuel stepped between them. "Easy there, Marshal. She's unarmed and holding a baby." "Ma'am, you need to come with us," Peterson said. "You can tell your story to a judge back in Colorado. I'll tell it right here. Mr. Garrett, my employer, he tried to force himself on me. When I fought him off, he fell and hit his head on the fireplace hearth. I didn't mean for him to die, but I wasn't going to let him." She glanced at him and couldn't finish the sentence. "So you admit you were there when he died?" "I admit I defended myself and my daughter from a man who thought he owned me." With anger, "I took money he owed me for 3 months of work he never paid me for, and I left because I knew no one would believe me over a wealthy white man." Samuel studied the marshals' faces and didn't like what they had already decided Lily was guilty and weren't interested in hearing her side of the story. "Lily," Samuel, "go back inside." "No," "I won't run any more. If they want to arrest me, they can do it, but they're going to hear the truth first." "Ma'am, we've heard enough," Peterson came forward. "You're under arrest for murder and theft. Hand over the child to Mr. Carter here and come along peaceful." "Like hell," Samuel said, raising his rifle slightly. "You've got no jurisdiction in Wyoming Territory, and you've got no warrant that I can see." "Oh, do we?" "We have federal authority to pursue fugitives across territorial lines," Peterson, his own hand now resting on his gun. "And I have the right to protect people on my property," Samuel. "Lily, did this man Garrett attack you?" "Yes," Lily said, tears streaming down her face. "He said since I was living in his house, eating his food, I owed him more than just housework. When I refused, he grabbed me and tore my dress. I pushed him away, and he stumbled backward and fell." Tom Bradley, who had been silent throughout finally spoke up. "Samuel, I've known you for 10 years. You're not the kind of man to harbor a murderer." "I'm not harboring anyone, Samuel. I'm protecting a woman and child who deserve better than frontier justice based on assumption." The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with neither side willing to back down. Finally, Marshal Peterson lowered his hand from his gun. "We'll be back," he said grimly, "with proper territorial warrants and more men. You can't protect her forever." "Maybe not," Samuel agreed, "but I can protect her today." After the marshals rode away, Samuel and Lily stood on the porch in silence for a long time. Rose had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder, oblivious to the danger that had just been back. "You shouldn't have interfered. Now you're involved in this mess, too." Samuel turned to look at her, taking in her tear-stained face and the way she held Rose. "Do you regret defending yourself?" "No." "Then neither do I regret defending you, Samuel. We'll figure this out, Lily." "How?" "You heard them. Don't care about. They just want someone to blame." Samuel was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've got some friends in Cheyenne. men who knew my father during the war. Let me send some telegrams, see what we can find out about this Garrett fellow. If he was the kind of man who would attack a woman in his employ, chances are you weren't his first victim. And if we can't prove that, Samuel met her eyes, then we'll deal with that. But I won't let a fight live. You and Rose belong here now. The words hung in the air between them, carrying a weight that went beyond simple employer-employee loyalty. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, both of them began to realize that what was growing between them was much more than either had expected or planned. Love conquers all boundary. 2 weeks after the marshal's visit, Samuel received a telegram that changed everything. His friend in Cheyenne, a former cavalry officer named Colonel James Morrison, had investigated Harold Garrett's background and discovered information that vindicated Lily completely. 3 other women had previously worked for Garrett, and all had left under mysterious circumstances, with one found dead in the river and another disappearing entirely after reporting his inappropriate advances to local authorities who refused to act. "Lily!" Samuel called as he burst through the front door, waving the telegram. "Come quickly!" Lily emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her apron and a concerned expression on her beautiful face. Over the past weeks, she had grown even more stunning as the constant fear and hunger had been replaced by security and happiness. Her auburn hair caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, and her green eyes sparkled with life in a way that made Samuel's heart race every time. "What is it?" Wiping her. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Better than that," Samuel said, grinning broadly. "I've seen justice." He handed her the telegram and watched as her eyes widened. She read, 3 other women, sinking into a chair, a full He did this to 3 other women, and the authorities in Colorado have officially dropped all charges against you. You're free, Lily, completely free. Lily looked up at him with tears streaming down her, but for the first time since he'd known her, they were tears of joy rather than fear or desperation. "I can't believe it's really over." Samuel knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his calloused ones. "It's over. You and Rose are safe, and no one can ever threaten to take you away again." "What happens now?" Lily asked softly, and Samuel could hear the uncertainty in her voice. I suppose I could look for work in town now. Find a place of my own." The thought of Lily leaving hit Samuel like a physical blow. Over the past 5 weeks, she and Rose had transformed his house back into a home. More than that, they had transformed him back into a man who could imagine a future filled with happiness rather than just survival. "Is that what you want, to leave?" Lily studied his, seeing the vulnerability trying to hide. "What I want and what's proper might be 2 different things. People in town already talk about if I stay much longer." "Let them talk, Samuel. I don't care what anyone else thinks. But I do, Lily. Not for my sake, but for yours. You're a respected man in this community. I won't be the reason you lose that." Samuel was quiet for a while, then rose and walked to the window overlooking the path where his cattle grazed peacefully. When he turned back to Lily, his gray eyes held a determination never seen before. "Then marry me," said simply. Lily's breath caught in her throat. "Samuel, I know it's sudden," he continued, moving back. "I know we haven't known each other long, but these past weeks have been the happiest I've had since Mary and David died. You've brought life back to me. And Rose," his voice softened. He glanced toward the crib where the baby. "I love her like she's my own daughter." "You can't be serious," though her heart was pounding with hope. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," sighed, dropping to one knee beside her chair. "I love you, Lily Morrison. I love your strength, your courage, your kindness. I love the way you hum while you cook, and the way you talk to Rose. She understands everyone. I love how you've made a home again." Lily covered her face with her hand, overwhelmed by emotion she had never expected. When Samuel gently pulled her hands away, she saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes. "I love you too," "I never thought I could feel this way about anyone, especially after everything that's happened. But you saved us, not just from poverty or danger, but from loneliness." Samuel leaned forward and kissed her then, softly and sweetly, pouring all of his feelings into that simple gesture. When they broke apart, both were crying. "Is that a yes?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Lily laughed. "Yes, it's definitely a yes." The wedding took place 3 weeks later in the small church in Cedar Falls. Despite some initial gossip and disapproval from certain members of the community, the ceremony was well attended. Tom Bradley served as Samuel's best man, and Mrs. Patterson from town, who who had become Lily's champion after hearing the full story of her ordeal, stood as matron of honor. Lily wore a dress of pale blue silk that Samuel had ordered specially from Denver, and she carried wildflowers from the meadow near the ranch. Samuel wore his best suit and couldn't stop smiling as he watched his bride walk down the aisle toward him, carrying Rose in her arms. "Dearly beloved," began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Samuel Carter and Lily Morrison in holy matrimony. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through all of life's challenges, Samuel thought about the day he had first seen Lily on that auction platform. He had acted on instinct then, driven by compassion and a sense of he had never imagined that saving her would end up saving him as well. "You may kiss the bride," the pastor, and Samuel did so gladly, to the applause and cheers of their friends and neighbors. 6 months later, as autumn painted the Wyoming landscape in brilliant shades of gold and red, Samuel and Lily stood on their front porch watching Rose take her first tentative steps across the wooden planks. The little girl, now almost a year old, had grown into a happy, healthy to called Samuel Papa and filled the house. "She's going to be walking all over the place soon," her hand where their second child was growing. "Good thing we've got plenty of room for her to run around," Samuel, wrapping his arms around and resting his chin on top. "Are you?" leaning back against it. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again, Samuel. You and Rose saved me. This house was just empty rooms before you came. Now it's a home again." "We saved each other," he corrected, turning in his arms to face him. "I was so lost, so scared. I thought my life was over when I stepped onto that auction platform. I never imagined love, safety, a real family." Samuel kissed her forehead tenderly. "You've got it all now, and I plan to make sure you never have to worry about losing." As the sun set over their ranch, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Samuel and Lily Carter stood surrounded by the life they had built. From desperate beginnings had grown a love that would last a lifetime, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected